This podcast features criminologists discussing sensitive themes and topics. Listener discretion is advised. An unfair legal decision would lead one woman to expose a complicated web of lies and corruption. This is the Frieda Hanimov story. Hi, Amy, and hello, listeners. Today, I'm changing the pace a little bit and bringing us a different kind of crime story.
Oh, okay. Is that a white-collar crime?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit different. You'll see. I mean, although the story, I will say, of power, control, and money isn't new at all and is involved in this episode, the theme and the crime is not something we normally talk about. So, yeah, I would say a little bit different. It doesn't involve murder, which is a good change of pace, I think. And this case was suggested by my other bestie, Michelle, who has suggested a few on the show to date. She has a pretty good nose for unique cases, I would say.
Where'd she hear about this one? Did she see like a documentary or?
Yeah, she saw this on a Hulu series. It was a 4-part series called Mother Undercover. So she watched that series and suggested it. I had not heard of the case. I think it had very little coverage, perhaps because it was from the early 2000s. Social media was in its infancy, perhaps because it wasn't necessarily a case of murder. Mm-hmm. So for various reasons, I had not heard of it before. So I'd like to thank her. I love covering cases I have not heard of before, and I like the change of pace today. For people who are interested, this case was episode 3, but all 4 of the cases focused on stories where a mother went undercover in some way, and in many ways, very risky, because they would do anything to protect their children. So perhaps also feeling a little protective mama bear myself as I'm, nearing the end of my pregnancy while I was looking into this case, I felt a little bit more inspired to cover it.
Also, we recently released a case of a woman who took her daughter's identity and used it for bad reasons. So it's nice to see maybe a flip side of that.
It's very nice to see a flip side of it, certainly. I had a case in probation like that as well, where a man did that. It's interesting because it was one of the most devastating cases I had, but I never would have thought that a white-collar case would have had such devastating consequences. You tend to think of other crimes as more serious. But so, yes, I digress a little bit. On that note, yes, it is great to have a case on the flip side. I plan to check out the other 3 shows on Hulu, though, just so you know, because when there's a great docuseries, I'm interested. But for today, we'll be focusing on Frieda Hanimov. While Frieda was born in Russia, her Jewish parents feared religious persecution at the time. So they took their daughter and fled to Israel, where Frieda spent her childhood. In the late 80s, when Frieda was just 18 years old, she emigrated to the United States and lived with her sister on Ocean Avenue in Brooklyn.
I know where that is. My grandma lived off Ocean Avenue in Brooklyn.
Did she really?
I mean, Ocean Avenue is very long.
Yeah, I know.
It goes through a lot of different neighborhoods in Brooklyn, but yeah.
Okay. While Frieda worked as a nurse, the sisters had to share a 1-bedroom apartment, and Frieda had dreams of moving out on her own to live the American dream. She had these great big dreams. She wanted to be a wife, a mother, and she wanted to live in a big house in a nice part of New York.
She wanted to not work and just be like a stay-at-home mom, it sounds like.
I don't know that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, to be honest, but she wanted to be a mother. She wanted family, and she wanted a house, and she wanted the American dream. It's why she emigrated, Mm-hmm. And besides nursing, Frieda also found a lot of jobs to support herself. Quickly, her American dream seemed to be coming true as she met her future husband, Yuri Hanimov, a diamond dealer, shortly after she arrived in the United States. I believe she met him about 3 to 6 months after she got here. Now, according to Frieda, family and friends introduced her to Yuri, and while he was not really her type, the pair had a lot in common, and he showed Frieda a very nice life in America, and she said that they quickly fell in love. After just 3 months, they were engaged, and the pair married not long after and had 3 children together, Yaniv, Sharon, and Natty, and they were close in age. But while things were great in the beginning, Yuri worked a lot and it created contentious friction and arguments in the marriage. Despite often being alone in the marriage, Frieda's life with Yuri and her children seemed to be going just as she'd hoped. At least until she says she was blindsided by her husband. According to Frieda, she and Yuri had been married approximately 13 years in the year 2000 when his business took a downward turn. Now, remember, they lived in a nice home, and Yuri told Frieda that they had to sell this home where they had raised their children and move into a much smaller apartment in Brooklyn, which ironically, Amy, would be your dream, right?
It would be. Yes. You know me too well.
I know. I thought that as I was reading this. I'm like, Amy would be like, great. But it wasn't for Frieda. And then Yuri dropped a bombshell that made Frieda incredibly suspicious. And I think it would make you very suspicious as well, Amy, because Yuri told Frieda that in order to protect what assets they had left, the best and only option was for them to get divorced. Yes.
Okay.
Yuri explained that this would not be a real divorce, just on paper. And just to give Frieda the peace of mind she would want, Yuri would give his wife $6 million in diamonds. Remember, he was a diamond dealer. That was his business, which he explained would help protect their assets and would protect her so that she wouldn't worry about getting divorced on paper and losing what assets they had together in accounts.
Sounds pretty shady.
No, it doesn't sound right to me either, of course. But who knows how he pitched this? And also, who knows about taxes and protection of assets in this way? I certainly don't know that advance, but I would definitely look into it. And Frieda was very reluctant, but she also, remember, she trusted her husband. They had been together for a very long time, and despite having arguments about his work, they had a good marriage, she thought. So she signed the papers, fearing what would happen to them if she didn't. Unfortunately, Frieda's trust in her husband proved to be her downfall. After signing the papers, Yuri did not come back to their new Brooklyn apartment. In fact, he vanished, since legally, he was no longer married to Frieda. And now she was left with nothing, essentially signing away her financial rights to all of her husband's assets. But at least she had the diamonds for financial security.
I'm worried that the diamonds are fake.
Well, it turns out those diamonds were fake.
Oh.
Frieda's husband had just duped his loving and trusting wife of 13 years and left her and his children with nothing.
How old were the children at this point?
They were all young ages, 11.
They were minors.
They were minors, yes. They were all in need of support, of financial support. So what was Frieda to do? Well, a panicked Frieda turned to a lawyer and the courts for help, appearing in New York Supreme Court in front of Judge Gerald Garson in 2000. Surely she thought her husband couldn't get away with this kind of deception. She thought no judge would really allow this man to scam his loyal wife and mother of 3 children, especially leave her with nothing.
Was she at all concerned for his safety, or she just had an idea that he just fled at this point?
No, she learned very quickly that he was in fact fine. He was just not coming home, and he had told people that they divorced. Now, unfortunately, she placed her hope and her faith in the courts, thinking that they would protect her, but she would be very, very wrong. Her hopes of receiving fair justice were quickly dashed when Judge Garson advised her that she'd better settle this quickly. And, get this, Amy, she had violated her husband's rights by renting out the apartment that the pair co-owned together.
What?
She couldn't afford that new apartment anymore, so she rented it out, I assume, to stay with family or friends. And now she was the one who was in trouble. Frieda was absolutely shocked, disappointed, and scared. But let me tell you something. She was also very strong and very capable. And so in her head, she said, okay, I can go back to working as a nurse. That's what I did before. And she felt that as long as she had her 3 children and a job, she would be fine,
Wow.
which I think is pretty impressive. And her attitude was pretty impressive.
She had no other family nearby either, right?
She had a sister nearby, and I don't know how big her community was at that time, if she had other friends or other family members, and I don't know what her relationship was like with their family members, but I think you can assume she had some support, but she was still on her own financially. So in the end, in the court, she agreed to a very small financial settlement with Yuri, and she moved on with her life. Not long after, Frieda met a new man named Shlomo, with whom she fell in love, and 2 years after her bitter divorce, Frieda and Shlomo married, and she found herself pregnant and planning a new future. So at this point, 2 years after the worst experience of her life, Frieda's happy. She's excited. It's July of 2002. She has her kids. She's working. She has a new husband and a baby on the way. Things were looking very good for her. But apparently, this did not sit well with her ex-husband, who now wanted to claim custodial rights over his children, though he'd never shown this interest before.
Please tell me there's no way a judge is going to allow this.
Well, you'll have to see, because according to Frieda, Yuri began feeding the children ideas and messages about coming to live with him. Now, he still had some type of custody and saw them at his house, but they lived with her primarily. But Yuri was trying to convince the children that they would have a much better life with him. And Frieda might not have taken him seriously at first, but let me tell you, something big was about to happen. One night when Frieda was just a few months pregnant, I believe she was 3 months pregnant at this time, and she was coming home from her nursing shift, she was very surprised to find not just Yuri, but the police at her home. Her ex-husband had told the police that Frieda was abusing their children.
What?
Specifically, Yuri had their 13-year-old son, Yaniv, tell police that Frieda hit him in the face with a belt. Now, Frieda was shocked and declared that, first of all, she wasn't even home all evening, so this fresh red mark on Yaniv's face could not have been from something she did. She assured the police that she's never hit her children, never would, and she was really confused by this allegation. But Yuri pointed to this red mark on their son's face, and when the police asked Yaniv about how he got this mark, he said that his mother did it.
How old was he?
13 years old, and his father was there with him. A stunned and pregnant Frieda was arrested, and when being led out in cuffs, she said that she heard Yaniv crying that daddy lied to him and that he didn't want his mother to go to jail. So it sounded like his father put him up to this.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the other children all said they were never abused by her.
Yeah, they were actually taken out of the home and interviewed, and yes, their reports were very positive. But the damage was done. Frieda was arrested on child abuse charges and brought to jail for the evening. Now, Frieda was devastated and scared, and because she was pregnant, she describes the experience of being in jail. She had to use the bathroom a lot, which I can relate to right now. But in jail, many of the women were really annoyed with her because she was, as they say, hogging the bathroom. You think you're the only one who has to go. She was scared. She said that it was a terrifying experience, as jail can absolutely be. Frieda was released the next morning without bail, but her son Yaniv went to stay with Yuri, and right after her release, Yuri filed for custody of all 3 children. And when they went to family court, guess who the presiding judge was over their case?
The same one as before.
That's correct. Judge Garson, the same one who told Frieda to settle her issues with Yuri as soon as possible. So who was Judge Garson? Let me give you a little bit about his background. After graduating law school, Judge Garson and his associates worked in private practice during the 1970s and 1980s. But he got in a little bit of trouble during 1984 when he was censured for treating a sitting judge at the time, who he regularly appeared before, to a vacation away with his wife. Yes, you are not allowed to purchase vacations for judges you appear before in
not
court.
Okay.
The judge on that case was suspended without pay for 6 months, and Yuri, again, was censured. He received a slap on the wrist. After that, though, he went on to serve in the Democratic Party until his appointment to family court judge in 1998. So probably not the best person you'd want in your corner. Frieda couldn't believe she was going to have to deal with the same judge again, but it seriously motivated her to protect her children as well. Especially in light of the fact that during her own custody issues, she'd met a local Israeli man named Nissim Elman, who had won custody of his own children in front of Judge Garson. He made his own arguments, and she kind of saw this because she was in the courtroom. And Frieda said that she was in awe of how easily he had prevailed upon Judge Garson, knowing the struggles that she had had. So she approached Nissim and asked him how he'd managed to win. He explained to her that he was very friendly with Judge Garson and that he could actually sway the judge's decisions. And, of course, he told Frieda for the right price, he could do the same thing for her.
This poor woman.
I know. And Frieda was just absolutely shocked, scared, and upset at this answer. Like realizing if this is true, this judge is for sale, is what she said, what is happening. And what did this mean for her case and for her children? So she was scared, but she was also desperate to keep her children. She wasn't about to accept help, though, from a businessman with these shady judicial dealings. So instead, she contacted law enforcement agencies and was directed to the Kings County Prosecutor's Office in Brooklyn. Didn't you work there?
I worked there for 7 years. Yes. It was right around the corner.
Was it 7 years? Was it that long?
It was. Yep. It was for a couple of years while I was working at FDU. I was doing that.
Were you doing reviews? What were you doing there again?
I was doing research on their alternative to incarceration program, like interviewing people that are graduating the program and then doing data analysis to like program evaluation.
Right.
To see if their program's working. I love that job.
I know you did. Yeah, I didn't realize it was that long, though.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, well, she told the prosecutor's office about this, businessman who said that he had some sway over Judge Garson and about the fact that Judge Garson might have been taking money in exchange for judicial decisions. While the lawyers and investigators in the racketeering unit, for people not familiar with racketeering, that's really illegal profits through bribery, fraud, blackmail, threat. And in this unit, they took the claims seriously. But of course, they needed proof because this wasn't really anything substantial yet. So at 3 months pregnant, get this, Amy, Frieda agreed to wear a wire in a meeting with this Newsom guy. She met with him in his Brooklyn office, which she said was shocking because it was a factory-type office location that wasn't the most inviting office atmosphere, where he was surrounded by lots of televisions and other electronics. He was in electronics, but this was definitely more of the warehouse. The pair began to speak about Frieda's case in Hebrew, and she said that she was acting, and she made sure to convince Newsom that she was desperate. He told her that he'd actually looked into her case before their meeting, and he said that her husband, Yuri, had already paid the judge to have the upper hand in the case. And right now, as of right at that moment, she would lose her children based on Yuri's payment.
Whoa.
Yeah, she was shocked and she was freaking out thinking, what could she do? And she asked him.
She was also so happy that she had exactly what she needed on this wire now, right?
Not exactly.
No?
I mean, that's his word, right? But this isn't straight from the judge. And this is just some guy saying this. And so she asked him, what can I do? And he told her not to worry because he could help. Remember, the judge was his friend. The judge was in his pocket, but keeping custody of her children would cost her. But Frieda needed more proof than this, that Newsom was serious. So he offered to call the judge right then. So from his, phone line to the judge. And he dialed the courthouse direct. And although Judge Garson was unavailable and would call back, the direct connection was all Frieda needed to know, that there was indeed something illegal happening. And the fact that a sitting judge is going to call him back. So Frieda made a second recorded meeting with Newsom for more proof. The prosecutor's office wanted to have a couple of phone calls and a couple of details. They wanted more. They wanted it to be a solid case if there was one here. And especially because at this first meeting, he hadn't named a price yet. During the second meeting, he did, though. Frieda would have to pay $10,000 to keep her children.
Whoa.
Law enforcement had coached her to tell Newsom that she couldn't afford to pay that all at once, that she could pay a little bit at a time, because this would give them more chances to record him and get more details as well. So they would give her smaller amounts of money, $1,000, $2,000.
And also they probably want the money exchange to happen too.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
But instead of giving her $10,000 at once, they wanted it to happen over several meetings. And these meetings proved fruitful as Newsom showed Frieda several folders of information about other litigants in Garson's courtroom in order to convince her that she would win custody. So he's pulling out file folders on everyone else that he's involved with helping. Now, during these meetings, once they started and once she started paying, Frieda said she noticed she was being treated very differently by Judge Garson and by the law guardian he'd appointed to look over the children's best interest. This was a man by the name of Paul Simonovsky.
So they have even more evidence. They have so much evidence at this point.
They're gathering evidence, yeah.
Jeez.
Frieda began getting some favorable decisions like visitation with her children, All of a sudden, her abuse charges were dropped, and Judge Garson had a generally nicer attitude towards Frieda. But the Kings County Prosecutor's Office also decided to wire Neesum's phone now, having probable cause from Frieda's meetings to do so. So, yes, they had Neesum, and yes, they had some favorable decisions, but they didn't have the judge yet. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Law enforcement learned from these recordings that Neesum was promising money to Paul Simonovsky, the law guardian, from various parents coming through the courts. So now, this isn't just the judge, this is the law guardian as well.
So this is like the textbook case of a racket.
It is, yeah, and corruption. And who is it with? People who are supposed to represent the best interests of the people and children.
And people who are in the most vulnerable of situations, preying on. This reminds me of the judge who was taking kickbacks for sending kids to juvenile detention centers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just think about this, making decisions based on money.
Awful.
About parental decisions that can affect children's entire lives.
It's awful.
They began surveilling Simonovsky, and he was observed having a lot of friendly outings over drinks and meals with Judge Garson. I don't think it was a huge surprise there. But the chain of corruption among the three became obvious fairly quickly. And authorities were kind of surprised at how brazen lawyers and a judge were acting in public. Remember, also, Simonovsky appeared before Garson, and yet they're out in public like it's no big deal that they're having drinks and whatnot. So it made law enforcement question, if this is how brazen they are in public, what is going on in private? So they set up another play. This one was interesting. Frieda went to Simonovsky's office directly. Now remember, Neesum had been her middleman. Simonovsky, the law guardian, they didn't have direct contact. But she went there and acted desperate and offered him $1,000, basically saying she needed to get this taken care of with her children. Now he turned her away, just so you know. He did not take the $1,000 and he turned her away.
Really quick, Meghan, where are the children? They're in protective custody right now? Or they're with the father?
No, they're not in protective custody. 2 of the children were with her.
Okay.
And Yaniv was with his father.
Okay.
Now, the police would have loved for Simonovsky to take the money, but they had a backup plan, which was to record Simonovsky's phone. They had hoped that Frieda's move would tickle the wire. Now, we've heard this before, but for people who have not, this means create a situation in which the subjects of a sting would make incriminating statements on a wiretapped line. So they want him essentially to pick up the phone and make a call because they're tapping him based on the fact that Frieda just showed up.
Okay.
And in this case, it worked beautifully. Simonovsky turned down the bribe, but he called Neesum immediately, very concerned that Frieda even had his name and that she had come to his office and tried to bribe him. How did this happen? And this move opened the door for an even bigger sting operation, the one that they had all been waiting for. Securing a warrant, authorities were able to wiretap Judge Garson's office chambers.
Wow.
And that's the one that he was the big fish here, even though I think it was a surprise that a law guardian was also involved.
Isn't this like a federal case at this point? Or is it still local law enforcement or state?
Well, right now it's still local because this is happening in New York courts.
Okay.
Now, they wanted to know what was going on in the judge's chambers behind closed doors. So they listened for the next few months, and what they heard was shocking. First of all, they heard Judge Garson's sexist discussions about the women in his courtroom, which centered a lot on their physical appearances. And so that was one thing that was revealed that wasn't flattering.
I'm not shocked.
No, I'm not shocked either. They listened as Garson and Simonovsky discussed open cases that Simonovsky was arguing in front of Garson, which we both know is ex parte communication, and you absolutely cannot do.
Whoa.
With the judge, get this, Judge Garson informing Simonovsky how to proceed, like advising him exactly what to say, what arguments to make, so that Garson would rule in his favor.
How did they not just burst through the door at that point? I would have been like, if I was those officers listening to this.
I don't know. I don't have the patience either. I think I would have burst through the door. So good question. They heard Simonovsky inexplicably granted more than a fair share of cases from Garson. So at the time they could appoint law guardians, and Simonovsky was getting an inordinate amount of cases from Garson. After they heard enough of these recordings, they decided to offer Simonovsky a deal if he would work with them to get Garson.
Oh, he'll definitely. I mean, he's going to take it because he's a snake.
You're absolutely right. And he quickly agreed to the arrangement when confronted. Like, he folded immediately.
Wow. He's still going to get something, though, I hope.
Well, the deal that they were making would require, he would lose his law license and he would have a misdemeanor, but no jail time.
What?
Or no real jail time. He might have some minor jail time.
Okay, so this is a very sweet deal. It's almost absolute immunity compared to what it could be. Wow.
Compared to what it could be. Yeah, and we'll talk about what went down and who got punished and whatnot. But the deal involved an offer of a sting kickback now. And this is what went down. Another sting operation. Simonovsky essentially gave Garson $1,000 in cash as a thank you for a referral on a case. So he went into his office. Oh, I forgot. It's time I give you a little something. Now, Garson took the money, though later his lawyers would argue he tried to give part of it back. They also tried to argue that accepting a referral fee, while technically wrong, is not the same as accepting money in exchange for legal decisions.
Okay.
So they're arguing the nuance here. And I'll tell you what happened. Garson did make an interesting move. After Simonovsky had given him that money, he called Simonovsky back to his chambers, where he said, "Here, take the cash and instead write a check to my wife's campaign." So his wife was also a sitting judge with no records of, just so you know, any crime before or after, and seemingly no involvement here. So he's saying basically, why don't you make a campaign contribution instead? This keeps it cleaner.
Oh, you thought that he was...
Instead of giving me cash,
Yeah.
Maybe you're just offering to help my wife's campaign.
Yep.
And Simonovsky agreed, but he also told Garson, I'll do that, but keep the cash. Garson kept the cash too. So he kept the cash, and in fact, you can...
How much cash?
$1,000.
$1,000, okay.
And you can see him counting it afterwards, putting some in his pocket and the remaining amount in an envelope in his drawer in his office. So law enforcement felt like they had the smoking gun now. They were good to go. The judge was arrested 1 month later in 2003 for bribery, a charge for which he faced up to 7 years in prison. And he wasn't the only one who was facing time. Along with him, the electronics dealer, who I would call the fixer, Nisam Elman, was arrested, as well as Judge Garson's court clerk, Paul Sarnell, and the bailiff of the courtroom, Louis Salerno, because they were all allegedly in on several years of bribery crimes.
What about that legal guardian or whatever?
The law guardian, remember, he had already made the deal.
Oh, yes. Okay.
He was the one who gave them all the information.
Yeah, okay. Wow.
Okay, so these people are arrested, but I don't know what the proof is. So the question is, was the proof there? Would they take deals? And would they pay a real price for their actions? And what about Frieda? Did she end up getting custody of her children? What happened with her case? So we still have a lot of questions to answer here. The court clerk, Paul Sarnell, was found not guilty of any criminal charges. He went to trial and he won. I guess the proof was not strong enough against him, and maybe nobody turned on him.
Okay.
Garson's court officer, Louis Salerno, was convicted of facilitating bribes, and he was sentenced to 1 to 4.5 years in prison. He wasn't convicted on many counts, just so you know. I believe it was maybe 2 counts. Nisam Elman, the fixer, pleaded not guilty to any charges, and in fact, he went on to do an interview on CBS's 48 Hours, in which he categorically denied any wrongdoing. What he said was that he may have been a braggart and he boasted a lot and collected money for Simonovsky for referral fees, the law guardian, but he was never involved in a bribery scheme and that he didn't even know the judge.
Okay.
He was planning on taking his case to trial, but in the end, he pleaded guilty to receiving money from divorce litigants, which he would pass on to Simonovsky, because that's what they could prove he did and what he admitted to. Interestingly, though Nisam had bragged about this relationship with Judge Garson, the evidence seemed to indicate that he did not know the judge personally.
Okay.
And that he was being honest about that part. It was Simonovsky who he knew, and he did like to brag. Regardless, he was paying off a family court lawyer and admitted to doing so, for which he received a sentence of 16 months to 5.5 years in prison. While I don't know his status right now, or his second status, he was denied parole at his first parole hearing. So he at least served 16 months.
Did he have infractions or...
I don't know if he had infractions or if he just wasn't remorseful. I suspect he just wasn't remorseful, minimized what he had done. Now, Simonovsky's cooperation led to the prosecution and conviction of not only the legal players, but also some of the former spouses of the victims who appeared before Garson in the courtroom because they were paying for these decisions. As I said before, for his cooperation, Simonovsky lost his law license and received a conviction for a Class A misdemeanor offense with either no or very little jail time. As you pointed out, this is really no punishment at all. As for Judge Garson, well, Judge Garson was convicted of bribery for accepting gifts, mostly in the form of meals, alcohol, and cigars, in exchange for assigning Simonovsky cases and advising him how to argue those cases. In the end, it appeared that the judge didn't receive much money at all. When asked why he did it, he said that he liked Simonovsky, saw himself in the kid, a younger guy. He liked helping him. He liked advising him. I think he liked the attention, too, that Simonovsky gave him. Drinks, being kind of, pampered, but it wasn't big money that he was actually bringing in.
I don't like that Simonovsky got off way too easy.
I know. I don't either, because he seems like the more, I guess you wouldn't say more culpable, but...
He was young. How old was he?
I mean, I saw pictures of him. He was definitely young. I mean, I would say late 30s, 40s.
Okay.
Simonovsky, it's hard to say he's the most culpable, but he certainly seems the most profit-driven, the most calculated in this scenario. So it seems icky that he got off the lightest. As for Judge Garson, he was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison in 2007 and released 2 years later on good behavior at age 77. Unbelievably, Garson also provided information that the chair of the Kings County Democratic Party threatened to withhold party endorsements unless candidates paid. So Garson's giving information about another scandal that goes higher up in the party.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why he got out early? He was like trying to make deals, or did he not get anything in exchange for that?
I'm not sure what he got in exchange for that. I mean, but he did get paroled early enough. Yeah. He was older and he was good in prison. So I think it could have been fitting. Maybe he was trying to make amends. I have to tell you, the chair of the party was convicted of violating campaign laws, extortion, and grand larceny, and was sentenced to 3 to 9 years in prison, stemming from Judge Garson's initial information.
Wow.
And there were 3 other members as well who were also charged and prosecuted.
He definitely got something out of that.
A silver lining to this whole ordeal was that there were some changes made to the way family court operates in New York. And I don't know as much about family courts as I do about criminal courts, but specifically, and I think this is a good change, court procedures were amended to require a rotation of law guardians so that no judges could continue to favor certain guardians. And this is a very strong measure to prevent collusion among parties. So I thought this was a very positive change. In all, Frieda Hanimov's wiretapped interviews brought down a pretty corrupt chain of officials, those entrusted to represent the people. But what about Frieda's fate? Well, she received, after this case, free representation in her ongoing custody battle with her ex-husband, and she won custody of all 3 children from her marriage to Yuri, as well as being reunited with her entire family, which now included 2 babies with her husband, Shlomo. By all accounts, Frieda and her family thrived after this incident, maintaining close relationships with each other, and she is now a proud grandmother, and I'd say an even stronger person in the end.
Wow. I can't believe that she set off that chain of events.
I was glad to see that things worked out for Frieda in the end, and yeah, it was really just her sheer determination that I thought brought down this ring. People were very upset by Judge Garson's release, particularly those families who were affected. You know, it was viewed in the way that we hear white-collar crimes viewed, which we'll talk about in a minute in the system, but in the idea that, well, there wasn't any real harm. Yes, there was substantial harm done to the children of these people who received decisions based on money and favor. This is extremely harmful. So that sentiment just does not prevail. However, as I mentioned, Judge Garson was 77 years old at the time. He also had an established history of alcoholism. I'm not sure how bad that impacted his health. And I believe he actually spent some time in a halfway house following his release as well.
And he never returned to the bench, I would imagine.
No, absolutely not.
No.
It obliterated, obviously, his legacy. Okay, let's turn to explain the how and why of this story, right? How this happened. Well, These theories aren't the ones we typically rely on, but I'm going to suggest that Tittle's control balance theory is seriously at play here. Now, a judge with very little oversight and entirely too much power has what we call a power surplus. It's just too much power. And we see this happen in policing and in prosecution a lot, where police and prosecution also have a lot of power, which does not always lead to crime as a norm. It's actually not the norm. In this case, interestingly, it seemed that Simonovsky was the real benefactor. And I really got the impression that Garson, an older judge with clear stereotypes and a sexist attitude, do not get me wrong, really simply liked Simonovsky and wanted to help him. And I don't think he cared for all the people who came in front of him in the courtroom, which is also something we explain. Judges are supposed to be unbiased, but in a lot of the research I've done on judicial decisions, judges make stereotypes and they make quick decisions based on these stereotypes and presumptions, just like ordinary people do. Mm-hmm. The only thing is it's more pronounced when it's combined with legal factors and legal decisions that need to be made.
How long was this whole thing going on before it came crumbling down? You said a couple of years?
Definitely a couple of years. I'm not sure how long the entire event, it could have been, several years, but at least a couple of years that we know of.
While differential reinforcement can't explain why Simonovsky started, it certainly can explain why he continued, because he was getting away with it and he was profiting. So sorry if I took that from you, but were you going to say differential reinforcement?
I wasn't really. What I was going to say for Simonovsky was it was just pure greed as well.
Yeah.
Simonovsky wanted the money. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I think Garson had the power and Simonovsky just wanted the money. So the two of these, they had I see it as somewhat different motives together and somewhat different causes of their crimes. Okay, so in explaining, why these crimes happen, we turn to the system. We're talking about crimes by actors in the system, which is a little bit of a change of pace for us. So how did the system deal with crimes by those in the system becomes the question. And this one's a little bit more difficult to answer. You had asked how long a judge was able to perpetrate these crimes and how long a law guardian was. Well, I don't know that we'll really know the full extent, although they were able to trace several cases back over the course of years. So how many lives of children were destroyed? And this is the most vulnerable population that the courts are tasked with protecting. Some might say there's no real punishment to fit this crime. And again, I can understand the argument that, wow, Simonovsky got no time. A judge got a couple of years, and it was simply his reputation that was taken from him. And so this is a very tough question. Was justice really served by these punishments in the end? What do you think?
I think the biggest problem with white-collar crimes is there's many more indirect victims.
Yes.
It's hard to know by taking a child out of a home what that does for the child in the long term and how many other people it affects, siblings, other people in the family, and how many people, because of that one particular situation, then struggled with mental health issues or substance abuse issues, and how that's like the domino effect. So white-collar crimes absolutely have many more victims than violent crimes. We just don't know what we don't know. That's the problem.
Because it's so much harder to measure, you're saying, what the full impact is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think with violent crimes, we see like direct costs immediate, and we're able to look at it and put our finger on it. And it's much harder to measure.
And the sheer number of victims. Of course, there's indirect victims with violent crime as well. But usually you can easily see the connections on who's being victimized. But there's so many indirect victims in these white-collar crimes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I didn't have so much of a problem with Judge Garson's punishment. I don't think prison was fun for him, but beyond that, he was very old. He lost his license, his reputation, and for him, I actually think that was what was the greater shame as we talk about extra legal punishments. I think for him, that was way more punishment than just going to prison for a couple of years, and it put a stain on his otherwise pretty prestigious legal career. So I think the punishment for him fit the crime. The punishment for Simonovsky is a slap on the wrist. And I always have a problem with, or I usually do, I shouldn't say always, when the government uses participants that are of equal culpability to get those who are of the same kind of level or maybe even lesser than. So Simonovsky was a leader in this criminal ring. He wasn't a lower guy. Even though you hear judge, that wasn't the case here. So I feel that using him was probably, it's like they probably had to make the case, but I don't like it at all.
What did Simonoski go on to do with his life?
I'm not sure, but he lost his law license,
Okay.
and I'd imagine he stayed out of the public eye since. I imagine for a guy like him, getting caught and losing his law license probably was a deterrent.
Yep.
And at least I sure hope so. I mean, sometimes legal and extra legal shame work together to form the perfect punishment. And so what I have to hope for is, in his case, a little bit of legal punishment, but really the extra legal shame that was brought to him was enough to put him on a proper path.
Do you know if they went back and reopened all the cases that the two worked together on?
That's so interesting. So they did, and that's how they were able to uncover more cases. It wasn't like, I don't know what the list was. It wasn't, I wouldn't say a laundry list, but there were definitely a couple cases that they identified. Interestingly, they were able to determine that Frieda's husband, Yuri, never paid anyone, and he was not involved in any payment to the judge. That was just something that Newsom had said.
That's so interesting.
That's
how
Frieda,
it started.
yeah. So he wasn't charged with any crimes in the end. As I said, a little bit of a change of a pace, and one that I think hopefully had a better outcome. I couldn't help but think of the children who were unfortunately in front of the judge and hoping that their lives turned out okay. Like you said, it's hard to measure what the long-term impact was on them. So we think of them.
I also think, although the punishment wasn't great, I think the fact that this ring was taken down serves as a general deterrent, maybe to other people who are working in the system and involved in some sort of racketeering behavior.
That's a great point. So yeah, I'm glad we pointed that out, and we're going to leave on that positive note today. But before we go, we'd like to take the opportunity to answer a question from our supporter. So Amy, do you want to read me our question?
Yes, the question is asking, what are our top 5 favorite books? 5's a lot. But I cheated a bit because I have most of my books right behind me. So all I had to do is a quick scan and say, oh yeah, that one, and that one. So if you don't mind, Meghan, I will start.
Well, that's good, because that's a tough one. Stumped me there.
I will give you, I don't know if these are my top 5 ever, but these are ones that I've read within maybe the last, half a dozen years that are come to mind more so. Between Two Kingdoms, I absolutely love, by Salika Joad. I might be saying her last name wrong, so I apologize. Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, Educated by Tara Westover, No Happy Endings, Nora McInerney, and When Breath Becomes Air by Paul, I forget his last name, it's something with a K.
So you actually had 5 books lined up because you knew this question, I think.
Oh, that's correct, because I get the question, so I knew the question. So you are on the spot, my friend. But yes, I knew the question.
Oh, I have so many books that I have loved and have impacted me. I can't come up with 5 on the spot because there's probably about 50. But I will tell you, one of the first books that actually shocked my conscience and rocked my world was Amazing Grace by Jonathan Kozol, about poverty and crime in the South Bronx, written in 1993 or 95. That book made such an impact on my life, probably, and my life course in terms of, work that we do. I was almost devastated over it, and I've read it several times. I also was very impacted by, probably similarly, an academic book that we read that I wouldn't really count as both academic and kind of mass appeal, Code of the Street by Elijah Anderson, and I've referenced that.
Yep.
Finding out about what was going on in inner city Philadelphia, and also finding this researcher who spent all these years trying to get to the root cause of the problem and revealing so many of the problems that we talk about, but really peeling back the layer and showing us, not just talking about it in academic legalese. So I was strongly impacted by that book. But then there's other probably books in different genres. I loved Good in Bed by Jennifer Weiner or Jennifer Weiner. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but that was one of my favorite books. Oh gosh, She's Come Undone rocked my world as well. So I have a long list of books. And right now I'm reading a book that is based on a true story that I think is excellent for our book club, The Fact of a Body. So I guess that was 5 for now. But again, I have 50 others. And if you're really curious, you could also look on our website. We have book recommendations.
Yes. Thank you for that question. It's a good one. Meghan, thank you for today's episode. It was a nice change of pace. I learned a lot.
Yes, I have to thank Michelle as well. And I thank everyone for listening. And we will catch you next time on Women in Crime. Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonzo. And music is by Desert Media.
If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime.
Sources for today's episode include CBS News, Hulu's Mother Undercover, The Daily News, Law.com, and Newsday.